Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our live virtual event tonight with Phillip Margolin for his new thriller, A Reasonable Doubt. My name is Lane Jacobson, and I am the owner of Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon. Before we really get into things tonight, just a few housekeeping and tech reminders. This is usually where I'd point out where the exits and restrooms are in the store. But I presume or hope that you're watching this from home, so hopefully you know where those things are. This is just a quick reminder that this event is being recorded, and while we can't see anybody in the audience, just know that it is being recorded, and after the event concludes, you'll be able to view this and the other events that we're doing in our Books in Common Northwest series at this website that you're on right now, and also at booksinCommonNorthwest.com. If you run into any tech issues along the way, we recommend you first try refreshing your browser, and we also recommend using the Google Chrome browser for best results. If you're having any audio issues, we recommend plugging in some headphones, and that usually does the trick. We would like to also remind everyone that this is a shared creative space that we want to remain safe for everyone, and that you be respectful of everyone who has joined us tonight. Offensive comments or questions will see the questioner dismissed from the event. And this event is part of a series that us here at Paulina Springs have put together alongside Madison Books in Seattle, Washington, and Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana. And we hope that you'll continue to join us every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Mountain Time for the foreseeable future, as we've got a lot of authors lined up that we're very excited about. There's also a buy button down at the bottom of the screen, so you can show your support for Phillip and the stores that are involved with Books in Common by purchasing your book from one of the sponsor stores. And throughout the event, if you have any questions for Phillip, just click the Ask a Question button down at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to them as time allows at the end of the event. And Phillip has reminded us that he loves to get through all the questions, so we shouldn't have any problem having all those answered. And you can also upvote questions that you like. You can view the questions that everybody else has asked and vote on the ones that you want to be answered first. And you can also leave comments in the chat window to the right. And before I pass things off to Phillip tonight, I wanted to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude to him for his support of Paulina Springs during the pandemic. Phillip made a very generous donation to kick off our GoFundMe campaign, which was recently met its goal. And we've always loved Phillip here at Paulina Springs, but we are officially declaring July 9th Phillip Margolin Day at Paulina Springs Books. And I honestly don't know what that means yet, but there will likely be a plaque and some goodies involved for Phillip. And we'll try to have him back to the store around this time in future years and do some Phillip Margolin themed stuff around this time in the future. So Phillip Margolin is the author of more than 20 novels, most of them New York Times bestsellers, including Gone But Not Forgotten, as well as the previous Robin Rockwood novels, The Third Victim and The Perfect Alibi. In addition to being a novelist, he was a longtime criminal defense attorney with decades of trial experience. Margolin lives in Portland, Oregon. And without further ado, I'll pass it off to Phillip and see you all when I come back for questions later in the evening.
So to write more than 20 books, you've got to be really old. And I've been doing these book tours since 1993, where I've been all over the country and in Europe and in Canada. And I do have to say this is the weirdest book tour that I've ever done. And I'm saying that having done a book tour during 9/11, where I was in an airport somewhere in the South getting ready to go to Nashville when the planes crashed into the Twin Towers. So to get to my next event, I had to share a cab with a trucker, and we went to Nashville. I think it was about 300 miles. And then I was supposed to do a signing in the Twin Towers about 4 days after the planes hit. So that was really strange. But this one's even weirder. I did start out on March 10th when the book came out in Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona. And that was in store. And then I did an in-store event in Houston, but things were starting to break, and the crowds got smaller. And then I was in Dallas, and then after that, everything pretty much closed down. So I'm actually glad to be able to do this type of event. I think it's just great to be able to talk to readers. And when I do a book tour and I'm in a store, and as I mentioned, I've done about 6 in Europe. I've done them all through Canada, all over the U.S. At the end of the talk, I always take questions. I do a Q&A. And what I find interesting is that whether I'm in Oslo, Norway, or Ottawa, Canada, or Oklahoma City, I get the same questions at the end. So what I decided to do, and the big 3 are, where do your ideas come from? Since you're a criminal defense lawyer for 25 years, how did you make the transition to being a writer? And then how do you physically write? Do you use a pen? Do you use a computer? So what I have decided to do is to cut to the chase and just talk about those 3 questions. And then at the end, I love questions, and I have a personal reason for that. And I will actually stay on this until you're done with your questions, because I love them. The reason I like them so much is I am the first published author I ever met. And I didn't meet me as a published author until I was in my 30s. I only had 1 writing class my whole life. I got a C+ in it, so that wasn't very encouraging. That was in my sophomore year in college. So I would have loved to be able to ask authors, how do you do this stuff? So I love questions. So if you want to ask a question, don't be shy about it. And I will, like I said, I will stay and answer questions till everyone's exhausted with them. So how did I become a writer? Well, it's I have a very bizarre writing career. When I was in the 7th grade, as a result of reading too many Perry Mason novels, I decided that I was going to be a criminal defense lawyer when I grew up and try murder cases. And that was the only thing I ever wanted to do. And for 25 years, that's what I did. I did over 30 homicides. I did death penalty cases, argued the U.S. Supreme Court, and just really had a very unusual and enjoyable legal career. But as far as the writing goes, and this is the truth, never did it ever occur to me that I would ever be an actual writer. And there's a reason for that. I'm a voracious reader. I still read 2 to 3 books a month, or pardon me, a week. And I started reading 2 or 3 books a week when I was in elementary school. And I was just in awe of writers. It just seemed like it would be impossible to do that. And so it never occurred to me, to think about, when I grow up, I'm going to be a writer. I've heard other writers talk, and they said, when I was in the 2nd grade, I got an A on a story or a gold star on a story. And from that point on, I wanted to be a writer. That wasn't me. And the way I got into it is sort of strange, and the way I actually got published is even weirder. So in between college and law school, I spent 2 years in the Peace Corps in West Africa, Liberia. And then I came back to the States, and I went to New York University School of Law. But my last 2 years, I worked my way through teaching junior high school in the highest crime rate area in New York City, South Bronx at that time, and then going nights. So between teaching school all day long and then going to class till about 9 or 10 o'clock every day. I had about enough time to eat and breathe, and that was it. But then something really great happened. In order to get through in 3 years like the day students, I went summers. And the last summer, my wife graduated from college and got a job, so I didn't have to teach that summer. She was able to pay the rent on her apartment. And I already had a job waiting for me in Oregon, clerking for the chief judge of the Oregon Court of Appeals. So since I had a job, I just had to get D's in my classes to get out. I didn't really care about the grades anymore. I just wanted to make sure I actually graduated. So I had a free summer, and I've always worked. I mean, I had newspaper routes when I was a kid, worked as a stock boy and all sorts of stuff. So I was always working during the summer, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I had this free time. So I decided I was going to try to solve one of life's great mysteries, and that is, how do those guys fill up 400 pages with words? And I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but I would open this big book and I would say, God, how did this guy think all this stuff up? Seemed like impossible. So my project for the summer was to see if I could write a novel based on my Peace Corps experiences. Not to get published, because I didn't even think about that, or I just sort of assumed no one would want to publish anything I wrote. And not because I had something I wanted to say to the world. It was basically, could I write more than 25 pages on something, because that's the most I'd ever written. And it took me 2 years. My book was 187 pages, so I was very proud of myself. I'd actually gone over the 25-page limit. But when you're a lawyer, you're trained to be very objective and unemotional about your work. And being objective and unemotional about that book, I realized it wasn't very good. It wasn't, so I never tried to get it published. But I found I really liked writing. I loved creating a three-dimensional world where everything always worked out exactly the way I wanted it to, unlike real life. So in real life, I'd be in a courtroom and the judge would say, well, Mr. Margolin, I read your memo and your motion, and I'm going to deny it and sentence your client to die. And you have to go, oh, thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. But then I could go home and write a chapter where that happened. And as soon as the judge denied the motion, I could have a samurai come out and cut his head off, and blood would come out, and he'd be screaming in horror. And if you're a writer, it's very cathartic. If someone pisses you off, you can kill them in the most hideous way you want to, and you don't have to have therapy or take Xanax. It's very cathartic. So it was really fun to create these worlds and always have the ending exactly the way I wanted it to be. So the writing sort of became a hobby. And I still never thought about getting published. I did submit some science fiction stories every couple of years. They were pretty awful, and they always got rejected. And then when I was in my 30s, I had my own law firm. I was doing, murder cases and stuff, and I decided all those science fiction stories were getting rejected. So they say, write what you know. And I thought, well, maybe I'll write a crime story. So I wrote a crime story called The Girl in the Yellow Bikini, sent it out to a publisher, and forgot about it because 4 or 5 months went by, and I didn't hear anything. And then one day I walked into my law office, and there was a stack of mail, and sitting in the middle of the stack, and I can still see it to this day, was a gray envelope with black writing on it from Mike Shane Mystery Magazine. And I opened it up assuming it was a rejection of my short story, but instead they said, Dear Mr. Margolin, we were wondering if you would be willing to accept $65 from us to give us the honor of publishing your story. And my immediate reaction was that these guys were really stupid, because if they negotiated with me, I would have paid them twice that to get into print. I was just absolutely beside myself, thinking, oh my God, someone's actually going to publish a story I wrote. So what I got out of that was self-confidence, that maybe I could write publishable fiction that someone would actually, a publisher might want to buy it and actually put it out as a book. When I was clerking at the Oregon Court of Appeals, I came across what I consider to be the most amazing murder case in American history, not just Oregon history. It's called the Peyton Allen murders. And this murder case had everything and the kitchen sink. It had been in the courts for 8 years and involved all sorts of bizarre stuff like digging up corpses after 8 years to see if a fingernail clipping could be fit to the corpse, and just unbelievable things. And I had in the back of my mind that if I ever did try to write a serious novel, I'd try to fictionalize the Peyton Allen case. And so I went down and I got the transcripts of the case and I started writing. And I had 5 chapters in an outline when things got, like I said, very, very weird. Out of the blue, I got a call from a friend named Marty Bauer. And Marty had room next to me at NYU Law School my first year, and then we both switched and started working and going nights. And I had, I think, 1 or 2 classes with him. But then I got married, and we didn't have any classes together. Then I moved to Oregon, and I had been in touch with him for 5 years. And he called up and he said that he and his wife would like to come out to Oregon on vacation. Could we get together? And I said, yeah. I said, great. I said, well, you can stay at my house, and I'll take some time off, and I'll drive out, show you Multnomah Falls and the Gorge and all this sort of stuff. So he lands at the airport, and I picked him up. And as I'm driving back, I asked him the question any of you would ask someone who hadn't seen for 5 years. I said, so Marty, what are you doing? And it turned out that Marty was one of 3 lawyers for the largest literary agency in the entire world. And I said, Marty, I'm writing a book. And he said, oh God, he tried to start screaming, tried to get out of the car. No, actually, he was really, really nice. And I explained to him that I had only had this one writing class. I didn't know what I was doing. I had nobody to explain to me how you're supposed to write a novel. And I asked him, could you take my 5 chapters back to New York and just show them to somebody and ask them, what they thought about it. So Marty takes, I showed him around. He goes back to New York with the chapters, and I sort of forgot because weeks went by and I didn't hear from him. And then one night I was in trial about 5:30, court recess about 5, get back to the office at 5:30, assuming everyone would be gone. But instead, everyone was sitting around with champagne. And I said, what's going on? Someone won a big case. They didn't know. Your agent called and they sold your book. Well, I didn't know I had an agent. And what Marty had done is he liked the chapters. There was a guy named Jed Mattis who was at International Creative Management at the time. He was an apprentice agent. He had been a secretary to an editor of pocketbooks. Decided he'd rather be an agent than a secretary. So he was basically learning the ropes by, bringing coffee to real agents and opening their mail and stuff like that. And Marty said, my friend in Oregon wrote this, see what you can do with it. So he got a brainstorm, and he called up his old boss at Pocketbooks, and he liked the chapters. And next thing I know, I've got to write a contract to write a book, which was, for me, it's just I didn't know what to do. It turned out that book got published, and it eventually got nominated for an Edgar for Best Original Paperback of the Year. So then 2 years later, that was in 1978, in 1981, I wrote a book called The Last Innocent Man. that book became a movie, an HBO movie with Ed Harris. But after The Last Innocent Man came out, I stopped writing for about 12 years. And the reason is my real passion was criminal defense. And I loved what I was doing. And the same year that the book Heartstone, my first book, came out, I also argued at the U.S. Supreme Court, which, for those of you who aren't lawyers, that's like if you're a football player, it's like playing in the Super Bowl. It hardly happens to anyone. And also my daughter was born that year, so it was a pretty good trifecta. And in between the two books, I started getting hired to do major murder cases and big appeals, and all the stuff that I dreamed of doing when I was a little kid, I started actually doing. So I put the writing on the back burner, and then 12 years later, I got an idea at a dinner party for a third book, and I just thought, oh, it'd be pretty cool to get a third book. So I wrote it, and with no expectations. I wish I knew it was going to be this big deal, but to be quite honest, I just thought it would be nice to have a third book. And that book became an international bestseller. It's called Gone But Not Forgotten, and that really started my career. Everything you dream about as an author happened with that book. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 10 weeks. It got up to number 3 at one point, sold over 1 million copies, was made into a movie, and was a main selection of the one of the big book clubs, and on and on and on. I didn't win the Pulitzer Prize. That's about the only thing that I didn't get, but it was just a pretty astonishing deal. So A Reasonable Doubt is the third book in the Robin Rockwood series. And initially, I decided I was not going to write a series, and there's a reason for that. So what I'm going to sort of talk about is why I decided to actually write a series. So the first thing that happened when Gone But Not Forgotten became this massive hit was I thought, well, I have to, think about what my next book's going to be. And my gut reaction was that I was going to write a sequel and the main character is Betsy Tannenbaum, and it's a serial killer that she's dealing with. So that was my gut reaction. But then I remembered Arthur Conan Doyle. And Arthur Conan Doyle hated Sherlock Holmes. He really wanted to write historical novels. And whenever he writes something that didn't have Holmes in it, no one would read it. And they would say, when are you going to write another Holmes? And he just hated, he even tried to murder Holmes. He threw him off Reichenbach Falls in one of the books, and the public went crazy. So he had to bring him back. So I'm thinking to myself, well, what if the second Betsy Tannenbaum is twice as successful? I will be stuck writing Betsy Tannenbaum serial killer books for the rest of my life, and I'll go nuts. So I decided to take a chance. And I was hoping that if I wrote a really good book, people would like it even if it wasn't in a series. So the next book I wrote was After Dark, and it's got more murders and more twists and turns and a big surprise ending than, more dead bodies than Gone, and just as many twists, maybe even more. But it has a whole different feel to it. Gone was this really scary, freaky serial killer book. After Dark is really a love story. It's Beauty and the Beast with lawyers. And then the next one I wrote was The Burning Man, which was a coming-of-age book with lawyers. So I was trying to stay away from. I like the legal thriller genre, but I tried to make each book totally different. Well, book number 7 was Wild Justice, and I introduced Frank and Amanda Jaffe, who are a father and daughter criminal defense team in Portland. And that was intended to be just a standalone. So then the next book I wrote was The Associate, where a young Blair is arrested for a murder he didn't commit, and he has to have a defense lawyer, someone to represent him. And I was going to invent a different, just invent somebody, but then I thought, I really like Amanda Jaffe from Wild Justice. Maybe I'll give her a cameo role. So I just stuck her in the book for about, 75 pages scattered around. And then the next book I wrote was called Ties That Bind. Now, the way I write, what my writing process is, I get an idea for the book, and then I don't write. I just think. Sometimes for years, Executive Privilege had this idea, could the President of the United States be a serial killer? And I got that idea in 1995, but I could never figure out the ending. And I will not write a single word unless I know the ending of the book. Now, I can change the ending. I've done that a number of times, but I have to know where I'm going. And once I get the ending, and I've thought about the book for a while, I do a very comprehensive outline. They're usually 25 pages. I've done outlines that have been 60. And I literally talk my way through the book from the first chapter all the way to the end of the book. And of course, once the outline's done, I have the whole book written. It's in shorthand, but I just simply take each paragraph and I turn it into a chapter. The first draft is usually not publishable quality, but I look at it as like a 400-page outline. So I really, it's not something I want anyone to read, but I've got all my ideas out of my head and they're physically on paper. And then I spend months and months and months editing. Well, when I did the outline for Ties That Bind, the Jaffes weren't in it. And then I realized, they would fit beautifully into this book. And I had never written a book where I had to bring the life of a character forward. And I thought that would be a cool challenge, be an interesting challenge. So that was the second Amanda Jaffe. I've had 5 Amanda Jaffes scattered around in between standalones. I've had another series with Dana Cutler that started with Executive Privilege. And the first 3 books were in different branches of the federal government. Supreme Justice, Executive Privilege was in the White House, Supreme Justice in the Supreme Court, and then capital murder was in the U.S. Senate. And then, again, I would scatter the Dana Cutlers and stuff and the Amanda Jaffes in with standalones. Well, in the early 2000s, I switched publishers and went over to St. Martin's, and they thought it'd be good to write a series to, just to get me started with them. And I was thinking, I have about at least half my books, maybe more, have very strong female characters. And a lot of times these women get into dangerous situations. And I was thinking, in real life, if a man and a woman had a fight, guys have bigger upper body strength, they may have done boxing or something, so they're probably going to win. And then I said, if I make my main character a professional fighter, then if she gets into a dangerous situation and actually wins a fight, it won't seem so strange. So I started thinking about this character, and I created Robin Rockwood, who I really, really like. Reasonable Doubt is the 3rd book in the Robin Rockwood series, and I have finished A Matter of Life and Death pretty much. It's gone through the editing process. It's still have to copy editing stuff. That's going to come out next year, and then I'm currently working on a 5th Robin Rockwood, and I'm really enjoying doing this. Now, I should tell you, I try to write each book in a series as if it was a standalone. So you don't have to have read Third Victim and A Reasonable and Perfect Alibi in order to enjoy Reasonable Doubt. When I read series, I hate it if by accident I've never read anything in the series and I get book number 4 and I have no idea who everybody is. And if you didn't read the first 3, you can't follow the plot. So I try to make the books like standalones. And if you do need to know about characters, I give them a little bit of background. But what I thought I'd do before talking a little bit about Reasonable Doubt is to give you some idea of what Robin's like. And I usually don't do readings, but I was at a Tucson Festival of Books about 2 years ago, and I was on a panel with literary writers, and they wanted everybody to do a reading from their book. And I found that the first chapter of Perfect Alibi, which is relatively short, or the first part of the chapter, is a great introduction to Robin. So rather than me tell you about her, I'm going to read this section, then I'll talk a little bit about where I got the idea for Reasonable Doubt, and then I'll throw it open for questions. So, at 5:30 on a rainy Monday morning in October, Robin Rockwood ran the 5 miles from her apartment to McGill's gym in Portland's Pearl District. For decades, the Pearl had been home to dusty, decaying warehouses. Then the developers had moved in. Overnight, most of the grimy, rundown buildings were replaced by gleaming high-end condos, trendy restaurants, and chic boutiques. McGill's was on the ground floor of one of the few old brick buildings that had escaped gentrification. It was dimly lit and filled with a rank odor you had never found in modern air-conditioned workout emporiums. Barry McGill, the gym's owner, was taciturn, monosyllabic, and profane. Rumor had it that he had mob connections, but people with any amount of common sense were too wise to ask him about it. Salt and pepper stubble sprouted on McGill's fleshy jowls and whiskey-reddened cheeks. He'd fought as a middleweight in the 1980s and had a broken nose and scar tissues to prove it. But his days as a 165-pounder were long past, and the weight he carried in his gut, butt, and thighs had elevated him to the heavyweight division. "Lockwood," McGill called when Robin walked in. "Yeah?" "See the kid slacking off the heavy bag?" A young man in his early 20s was hitting the bag with lackadaisical punches that barely made it move. Robin judged his weight at welter, about 147, slightly above her 140, but she couldn't see an ounce of fat on him. "That's Mitch Healy. He just won his first 2 MMA fights, and his head's swollen. Want to take him down a peg?" Robin was 5'8" with a wiry build, blue eyes, high cheekbones, and short blonde hair. She'd earned some of her Yale Law School tuition, fighting in mixed martial arts matches, and had been ranked as high as 9th nationally. Her straight nose was a testament to her defensive skills as a cage fighter. In case you haven't noticed," Robin said, "that kid's a man, and you just told me he's in training?" "Hey, I never took Rockin' Robin for a pussy," McGill said, referring to Robin's ring nickname and the old rock and roll song Robin's fans would sing when she walked into the octagon. "Screw you, Barry," Robin snapped back. "Listen, I wouldn't ask if I didn't think you'd give him a hard time." Robin gave McGill a hard stare. He raised an eyebrow. Robin turned. I wouldn't ask about that. He raised his eyebrow and Robin sighed. "Are you going to cover my dental work?" she asked. "Screw, hell no," McGill answered. "You always were a cheap bastard." McGill grinned. Robin went to the locker room to change. "Hey, Mitch," McGill shouted when Robin returned. "Yeah? Come on over here. I got you someone to spar with." Healy looked around as he walked over her. "Are they in the locker room?" "Nah, she's right here in front of you." Healy looked at Robin, then he laughed. "I'm not going to fight with a girl." "That's one brilliant deduction. You're a regular Sherlock Holmes." "I'm not sparring with a girl. You see anyone else around? You've been dancing with that bag for the past 20 minutes. Might as well dance with a flesh and blood female. Hell, Maybe you can even give her a few pointers. Healy hesitated, and then he gave Robin the once-over and shrugged. All right, let's go. Robin had stopped fighting professionally after suffering a brutal knockout on a pay-per-view card in Las Vegas on her first year in law school. But she was still in great shape. Robin could see that Healy had no respect for her, which meant that he would underestimate her. When they got on the mat, Robin started moving like a beginner, flicking out slow, sloppy jabs. Healy looked bored and prodded her unenthusiastically. Robin moved a little closer, and Healy threw another lazy jab. Robin slid past him, spun behind him, threw one arm through his crotch, and encircled his waist with her other arm. Then she grabbed the encircled arm with her hand that was between Healy's legs and lifted him in the air. When Healy thrashed around, Robin aimed his head at the mat and drove him straight down. When he hit the mat, Robin wrapped her legs around him in a figure four scissors and slapped on a chokehold. Healy struggled for a while and then tapped out. Robin rolled off Healy and jumped to her feet. Healy sprang up. He looked furious. Robin circled and Healy charged. Robin counted on his anger clouding his judgment. She sidestepped the charge and landed a shot to Healy's jaw that would have unhinged it if she hadn't pulled a punch. Healy stumbled and Robin snapped a kick that landed on the side of Healy's head. She pulled the kick too, but it still sent Healy sideways. All right, that's enough, McGill shouted. Robin bounced out of range and Healy glared at her. I said that's enough, Mitch. Now, why don't you start your workout again, and let's put some effort into it this time. McGill rarely complimented anyone, but he nodded at Robin. Next month's a freebie, he said as she took off her headgear and walked to the weights. Who the hell was that, Healy asked. That was a girly girl who just kicked her ass, McGill answered. Healy watched Robin for a second before turning back to McGill. Is she single? So that gives you a little bit of an idea about Robin, her background. And for this book, the third book in the series, I turned to one of my real interests. I love magic. Back in 1970, ABC used to have a late night show where each week was something different. They had the first, I think, full contact karate tournament, and they just do different things, race cars. But one night, they had a show devoted to magic, and I'd never seen real stage magic before. And by the end, I think hour and a half, my jaw had been completely unhinged, like I'd been hit by one of Robin's punches. I just couldn't figure out how they had made all these people disappear and reappear and pick cards out of decks. I mean, I just was floored. So from that point on, I really developed a love of magic. I can't do any magic tricks. I'm very uncoordinated, so I can't do the tricks. But I've seen almost all of the famous magicians like David Copperfield and Siegfried and Roy and all these guys in person. If ever I get a chance, I always go to a magic show. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to write a mystery novel, a legal thriller that involved a magician? And so what I did was I created A Reasonable Doubt, where the magician's a real bad guy. But the most fun I've ever had is writing this book because I had to learn how to do one of these huge stage illusions like David Copperfield does. And the one I decided to do is called the Chamber of Death. In the Chamber of Death, the magician's locked in a coffin, padlocked in, and then poisonous scorpions and snakes are fed into the coffin. And you can hear him screaming, the trick's not working, let me out, and then you hear hideous screams. And of course, when the coffin's unlocked and open up, the snakes and scorpions are there, but the magician's gone. Except in A Reasonable Doubt, when the coffin is opened up, the magician's dead, and someone has murdered him on stage in front of a packed house of 3,000 people, and you don't know who the killer is. So the first thing that I did that was so much fun, I have a friend of mine, Marshall Abenton, and Robert Kabasi. They're both lawyers. Marshall's actually a judge, but they're both amateur magicians. And they told me how to do the Chamber of Death illusion. And really, you don't want to know how these illusions are done, because when you're in the audience and you see them, you say, oh my God, that seems impossible. But when you find out how they're really, you go, that's how it was done. So it's a little bit disappointing. But the other thing I had to do was figure out, how do you murder someone in front of 3,000 people and no one knows who the killer is? So if you want to find out, you have to read Reasonable Doubt. And that's the end of my talk. And now I'd love to take any of your questions that you have. So please just ask away, and I will try to answer them all.
All right. So we'll get started, with some audience questions. And the one here at the top of the list, what do you think are your key strengths as an author?
Well, that one's really easy. I know what I don't do that well. My biggest strength is plotting. In all the time I've been writing novels, I don't think I've ever had a review, except maybe one of the 1-star reviews on Amazon where people just get really mad at you. But any review where they said the plot wasn't working, or my editor said this is dumb, this plot's no good. So I think I'm great at plotting. But my brother and I used to have a real running joke. And every one of the reviews I would get early on would say, this book is great, edge of your seat, blah, blah, blah. But somewhere there'd be a sentence that said, but Margolin's characters are two-dimensional. And we would always look for that line, and it was pretty consistently in there. So character development is a weakness. Because I'm a plotting guy, I'm more interested in, creating a murder mystery and figuring out how you solve it. And over the years, my editors have beat the hell out of me, and I would encourage them, because I would tell them, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I have no writing courses, so please, if you see something I'm doing wrong, just beat me up. Please let me, teach me how to do this. And I still remember at the top of After Dark, the first time I got it back from my editor, in big red letters, it said, Phil, every one of your characters, whether they're man or woman, young or old, are exactly the same. Does Jenny cook for herself, or does she bring food in? What does Matthew do when he's not trying cases? So over the years, I've really worked hard on trying to make my characters as three-dimensional as my plots. And for the past, several books, I have not had that Margolin's characters are two-dimensional or one-dimensional in the review. So I think I'm starting to learn. I think I finally figured it out.
This next one, why do you think so many lawyers end up writing novels? There are a ton of other authors out there writing fiction and doing it really well. And then I'm also curious what your own transition was like. Was it gradual or pretty abrupt?
So I think that's a fallacy. I don't think there are a lot of writers who are lawyers. If you are a lawyer who publishes a book, the publicist usually plays that up. So you get this impression that there are 10 million lawyers who have published books, but I think in reality, that's not true. There are lawyers that also write, but I don't think it's as many as you might think. And what was the second part of the question?
What was your transition? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was pretty easy. The thing I did best as a lawyer was appellate law, where you write briefs in the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals. But that style of writing is completely different from writing a novel. When you're writing a legal brief, you're trying to explain why your idea is superior to the other fellow's idea, and you don't try to make it a mystery. You pretty much do Dick and Jane stuff, because you want the person who's reading the brief, the judge, to be able to clearly understand what you're talking about. I just sort of have a knack for writing, and it was a very smooth transition. It was never, it wasn't hard at all. When Gone but Not Forgotten came out, I had about 2 years worth of cases, and I was really still enjoying myself. And I didn't know whether I would like to be a full-time writer. I'd only done it as a hobby. And I also didn't know if I'd be a one-hit wonder, because there are a lot of guys that have this one big bestseller, and then, the next one doesn't do so well. So what I decided to do was not take any new cases for 2 years. And as my case flow went down, I would be able to spend more time writing. And by the time 2 years went by, I had 5 New York Times bestsellers, and I knew at that point, I was going to be okay. I was married, I had 2 kids. I'm a very responsible individual. My wife's a lawyer too, so she would have been able to support us. But fortunately, after I had 5 straight New York Times bestsellers, I realized, I was going to be able to make a living. And quite frankly, after 25 years doing something, it's nice to get a new job, to do something else. So I love being a lawyer. I always emphasize that point, because a lot of people are, boy, you must have been great to get out of the law. I loved it. I really couldn't wait to get to work every day. My cases were, what you watch on TV, murder cases. I did 30 homicides and all sorts of cool stuff. But it was a very smooth and very easy transition.
Cool. Do you observe any trends or characteristics typical of crime fiction from different regions of the U.S.? Is there anything distinctive about the Northwest in this regard?
Well, I can't answer that because I read so many books and I really don't pay attention to trends. But I can tell you one really funny story that leads me to believe that there's a healthy trend with murder mysteries. When my second book, The Last Innocent Man, came out, and the first 2 books, Heartstone and Last Innocent Man, weren't New York Times bestsellers when they came out originally. They were reissued as paperbacks, and both were on the Times list for quite a while and did really well. But nobody ever bought the paperback rights to The Last Innocent Man. So, and I didn't really care because it was just for, I was just doing the writing for fun at that point. I was supporting myself as a lawyer. Well, in 1987, HBO bought the rights to make a movie out of The Last Innocent Man. And I called up my agent and I said, hey, hey, have you thought about trying to sell the paperback rights? So he said, yeah. He says, not only have I thought about it, but there's an editor over at I think it was Valentine at the time, who really likes the book, and he asked me if you had any other books. So I said, he told me, I said, yeah, he's got Heartstone. So I've sent that over to him. Well, at that point, I went on vacation, and I was out of the country for about 2 or 3 weeks. And when I came back, obviously, the first thing I did was I called up my agent, and I said, hey, what happened with that paperback deal? He says, oh, it fell through. He says, Joe, the editor wanted to buy it, but he got shot down by the people above him. So I called him up. I had met him at some conference or something, so I sort of knew him. I said, Joe, I said, this is going to be a movie. What's the deal? And he told me, well, Phil, I thought the books were great, but the people that I had to get the okay from said no one would be interested in a murder mystery that was set in the Pacific Northwest. So thankfully, that has changed. And I said, to give a plug to another writer, I mean, one of my favorite writers right now, I'm on the 8th book in the series, Colin Cotterell, and his books are set in communist Laos in the 1970s. And, you can get books that are set in Thailand and Japan and Saudi Arabia and Alaska and, South Dakota. So I think one of the nice things is that this idea that only mysteries set in New York or LA are worth reading, I think that's gone by the boards. And now it's not a trend. I think it's just, if you write a good book, the setting might actually help you.
Yeah, and that actually segues pretty well into the next question. Do you have any favorite international crime fiction or international crime writers?
That I read?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I read everybody. I read a lot of British. I just finished Colin Dexter's First Inspector Morse. So, and then like I said, I'm addicted to the Colin Cotterell books. So I'll read anything. And I can't remember his name. There's a really good Japanese mystery writer. I think he's the #1 mystery writer in Japan. I just can't remember his name. I've read 2 or 3 of his books and really love them. So, to me, I don't care where you're from. I hate genres. To me, it's either a good book or it's a bad book. So if it's a good book, I read it, and I don't care if it's science fiction or if it's written by some guy from Japan or whatever. So like I said, I read 2 to 3 books a week, and I'm constantly, trying to find new writers or old writers like Colin Dexter, who I never read before.
What advice would you give to young aspiring writers?
Okay, the big thing is if you get an idea, because all books start with an idea, and they're usually very tiny. Ideas are small. Could the President of the United States be a serial killer? That's a tiny idea. A book is this big. Book's 400 pages. So my advice is do not write. Once you get an idea, think. Don't write. And I do this, like I said, with the Executive Privilege, which is probably my second best book. I got the idea in 1995, and the book came out in 2000. I started writing it in 2005. Didn't come out to about 2008. And when I couldn't get the ending, instead of running out and writing, I just kept on thinking about it. I was writing other books, but I kept on thinking. So the more you think, the more you develop your plot. And if you just get an idea and get excited and start writing, then, I always give this example when I teach writing. So here's the best idea ever. There's a trainload of nuclear weapons going through Portland, Oregon, and the bad guys are going to hijack it. And so I get really excited, and I run back and I start writing this phenomenal action scene where ninjas are coming down from black helicopters, and there's karate fights and shooting and everything. And then the bad guys take over the train. It's the best action scene ever written. But then what? Who are these bad guys? Why did they take over the train? Who's the good guy? How are they going to get the train back? And because I didn't think and I just rushed in, I get really discouraged. I get writer's block. I rip up the thing and it never gets written. So again, I think my big advice is get the idea. Don't rush right in. And then, of course, my other thing is don't even think about starting until you've actually got the ending. You can change it. It's your book. You can change it. And I've done that a number of times with books, but I will not even jot down a word until I've actually got the ending of the book.
Interesting. And has the COVID lockdown had any effect on your process?
Actually, it's been the best thing. I hate to say that because it's so horrible. The whole pandemic's just so awful. But I was quarantining out in Lane's neck of the woods in Central Oregon, and 2 days after I got out to this second home that I've got out there, my editor got me the edits for A Matter of Life and Death, which is the next Robin Rockwood. So I spent about 2 weeks nonstop working on the edits. And then when they went back to New York, rather than twiddle my thumbs, I got the idea for the book that's going to come out after that, which will come out probably 2022. And so now I've got 228 pages written on that. The edits came back from New York, and I did, a second time finished with that. So that book's pretty much in the can except for copy editing. So the pandemic's been great for me. I feel horrible about saying that, but it's really, helped for me to be able to just come in every day and just spend several hours just focusing on my writing.
Yeah, and how has it had an effect on your reading as well? Do you do a lot of reading while you're writing?
Yeah, but one of the great things when when you have your own practice as a lawyer, you just don't have one case. You have a whole bunch of cases, so you have to learn how to compartmentalize. And I actually read while I'm writing. So, like today, I was working on one of the trial scenes in this book that will come out in 2022. And then I brought in some lunch and I read a book that Anthony Horowitz, The Word is Murder, is what I'm reading right now. It's actually pretty good. I'm really enjoying it. I've read some of his other books. And he wrote some of the Midsummer Murders and Foyle's War. So I read while I'm actually writing. And when I'm writing, I'm not thinking about the book I'm reading. And when I'm reading, I completely block out books. So, like I said, I'm always reading. I'm sort of addicted. I read while I watch television. If I'm watching a boxing match, I have my book there, and when they break in between rounds, I read a couple of pages of the book. So it's I always have a book with me, no matter where I go.
It's a fantastic skill. I have friends who are horrified at me for being able to listen to like classical music while I'm reading. Even that is too distracting for some of them. With so many strong female leads, do you have examples who inspire you or advisors who give you feedback as you develop your characters?
Yeah, this is a very funny story. So after Hearthstone, my first book, it came out in 1978. And after it was published, my editor called me up and he said, "Hey, Phil, would you like to write a series for pocketbooks with a female prosecutor?" And I was just terrified. And I said, I couldn't write a book with a woman. I couldn't do that. And I turned him down because I just felt like there's no way I could write a book with a woman in it. So the next book, Last is the Man, had a very strong male main character, not a woman character. And then the third book, like I said, was Gone but Not Forgotten. Well, that book, I started out with David Nash as the main character. He's the main character in The Last is the Man. And it's about a serial killer who dehumanizes women before he kills them. It's a very freaky book. I tried to create the most horrible human being who ever lived. And I think I succeeded because everywhere I go since 1993, people come up and say, "Did you write that book?" And I said, "Yeah." "Where do you get those ideas from?" So it's really, it's really freaky book. And so I had a scene in the book where the lawyer David meets Martin Darius, the serial killer, in a high-rise office building after everyone's gone home. So the only people in there are the cleaning crews. And it's a very scary scene. Now, I've represented serial killers, and I've represented a number of people who have, murdered somebody. And if I'm sitting in a contact visiting room with somebody who's a serial killer, but he murders women, I'm not that nervous because I know that is type. And so I'm thinking to myself, the level of tension with a male main character and Darius is like down at the floor. But I said, what if the lawyer was a woman very similar to the victims that the serial killer, tortures? Then the tension level would be absolutely through the roof. She's in this like almost haunted place. It's a high rise at night with nobody around except, a couple of cleaning people somewhere. And I realized that the tension level would be amazing. So I knew I had to do a sex change on my main character, but I was scared out of my wits. And I said, how am I going to write a book where the main character is a woman? And then I said, who's the toughest guy I know? And I've remarried. I have a wonderful wife, Melanie, that I married a couple of years ago. My wife, Doreen, passed away in 2007 from cancer, but she was a lawyer. And I thought to myself, she's the toughest guy I know. So I said, every time I write a scene with Betsy Tannenbaum, I'm going to imagine Doreen in the scene. And it was a great crunch. And I got through the whole book, got over my fear of women, and realized it wasn't really that horrible a thing to have, or that scary to write a woman main character. So since that time, I'd say maybe half, maybe more of the main characters in the book are like Robin Rockwood or Amanda Jaffe, very strong women.
What writers do you look up to the most? Do you have a favorite novel?
Well, I hate that question because I read about 3 books a week. I actually have an answer to that. My 3 favorite novels, and I might add another one in there. I love War and Peace. I've actually read it 4 times. Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which I think is the great American novel, and A Soldier of the Great War by Mark Halpern. And I just fell in love with A Gentleman from Moscow by Emma Tolles, which I just think is a magical book. My favorite thrillers are 2 books by Stephen Hunter, Point of Impact and A Time to Hunt. When I read Point of Impact, I thought no one will ever write a better action thriller, and then he wrote Time to Hunt, which is better. Relic by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Childs, which scared the hell out of me. It's very tough to scare someone with a book. And it's about a monster in the Museum of Natural History in New York. It's made into a decent movie, but the book itself is fabulous. And then my favorite all-time thriller is a book that no one knows about called Stone City by Mitchell Smith. And I think it's the War and Peace of thrillers. I don't think it's in print, and hardly anyone's ever heard about it, but it is just written as well as any literary novel I've ever read. And it's over 600 pages, and they fly by. If you ever wondered what it would be like if you were put in prison, it's about a college professor who commits vehicular homicide and is sent to the worst prison in the state. And there is a serial killer in the prison who's murdering the prisoners. And there are literally hundreds of characters, all totally 3-dimensional. There are some scenes that are better than most books I've ever read. It's just an amazing book. And like I said, unfortunately, I think it's out of print. But if you can ever get a used copy of Mitchell Smith's Stone City, grab it as quick as you can.
Good to know. It's funny you should mention that about Lonesome Dove. I think it is my all-time favorite book, and the company that I created that owns Paulina Springs Books is actually called Hat Creek Book Company, after Hat Creek Cattle Company from Lonesome Dove. And I've been shopping around or thinking about making my own sign to put up somewhere with the "We do not rent pigs" and all that stuff in the store.
Yeah, the funny thing is that I don't like Larry McMurtry. I've read a number of his other books, Cadillac Jack and some of the other ones. I mean, I didn't hate them. I just didn't think anything of them. And the reason I picked it up was because everybody, people at the courthouse, secretaries, I mean, it was amazing. We're coming up and saying, "Have you read this book?" So my son was on a swim team and went to Australia for 2 weeks, and I brought it with me, and I started reading it, and I didn't want to go out. I have to say, "Put the book down. You're in Australia. Go out. You can read this book anytime." And I would have to force myself to put it down. It's just brilliant. So I should mention, by the way, my 3 favorite mysteries. Mysteries and thrillers are different. Mysteries are where you can actually solve the mystery. Calamity Town by Ellery Queen is my favorite mystery writer. And The Chill by Ross MacDonald, which is, I remember I figured out who the killer was about 8 pages from when the reveal comes, and my jaw almost literally unhinged. I said, "Oh no, this is impossible." And they said, "Oh my God, it makes sense." And then Ruth Rendell's Shake Hands Forever. I always point out it's a so-so book. I wasn't going to read the last chapter because there's another book I wanted to read. It was a 5-page chapter, and I figured the whole book was over. I said, it's just 5 pages. Last 5 pages turn the whole book on its head, and it is amazing. And when I teach writing, I always say, you know, if you write a book that it's a great book with a lousy ending, people will hate you. But you can write a really mediocre book. If it's got a great ending, people will think it's like the best thing ever. So, next question.
Yeah. So obviously the subject matter in this one being magicians and magic, you mentioned that you have a personal interest in that, but do you have any favorite types of research that you've done for your novels? What is your research process usually?
Oh, you know, I love the research. I mean, when I was a lawyer, I had to do neutron activation analysis. I had to learn about the Mian tribe in southern China. As a writer, I had to learn whether you could trace someone from their eyeglasses and find eyeglasses and see. So I just love the research. The book that I'm writing right now has the one that's coming out next year, Matter of Life and Death. I show how you do a death penalty case from beginning to end. I did about 12 of them, but I had to learn how to cross-examine a fingerprint expert. And I actually never really done that. We had a case, big murder case involving fingerprint expert, but I didn't do the cross on it. And so that was fascinating for me. And then the one I'm working on now has to do with the shaken baby syndrome and postpartum psychosis. So I've been spending weeks reading through transcripts where the expert witnesses for the state who believe in the shaken baby syndrome and defense witnesses who don't discuss it. So I love the research. For me, it's like going back to school.
Yeah, very cool. And you kind of mentioned some of the projects that you're working on now, but do you have ideas for stuff further out?
No, I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. You know, I've got to do one. I do one book at a time, but I do have an idea file. And my desk I kept my office to write in. My desk has cubby holes. And I have these 2 cubby holes that are just filled with articles. Anytime I read an article or see something in the newspaper, you know, that I think might be useful in a book, I copy it and I throw it in my idea file. And then when I finish the book and I'm trying to think what's my next book, I take these thousands of pages out, put them on my desk and read through and see if there's anything that gives me an idea. So I don't have an idea for the one after the one I'm writing, which won't even come out for 2 years. But when I finish it, then I'll start trying to think of what I want to do next.
Great. Well, I think that does it for our questions and just about wraps up our event tonight. If anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to drop them in the ask a question box there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Philip, for taking the time out. Don't forget that you can purchase A Reasonable Doubt through the buy link there at the bottom of the screen. And you can also view a recording of this event at this webpage and also at booksincommonnw.com. And you can revisit this and write down some of those books that Philip recommended. And just a reminder that this is part of a series, and we hope to see you next Thursday at 6:30 Pacific time for Kendra Atlee work and her memoir and Eastern Sierra natural history book, Miracle Country. And I think with that, we are just about ready to sign off. Thank you again, everybody. This was a blast for me, and Philip, I hope that it was fun for you as well.
Oh, I had a great time. It's you know, I'm just so glad we can start doing this type of thing again. So thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.